There is a toxic piece of financial advice floating around today, telling you that taking a paid-off home into retirement is a mathematical mistake. Wall Street insists you should leverage your equity to the hilt and throw it all into the market because the returns are always higher. I am here to show you exactly why that strategy is a ticking time bomb for anyone over the age of 65. You have worked for 4 decades. You have navigated recessions, inflation spikes, and the systematic dismantling of the American pension system. You are not looking for a get-rich scheme. You are looking for wealth preservation and peace of mind. You want to know that your legacy is secure, that your spouse will be taken care of, and that a market correction won't force you back into the workforce at 72. Yet, every time you open a financial magazine or turn on a financial news network, an analyst in a slick suit is telling you that paying off a 3% mortgage is financial malpractice. They argue the spread. They tell you that if your mortgage costs you 3 or 4%, but the stock market historically returns 8 to 10%, you're throwing away free money by handing it to the bank. It sounds perfectly logical on a spreadsheet, but you and I both know that life is not lived on a spreadsheet. Let us look at Arthur and Diane. They're a 68-year-old couple living just outside Grand Rapids, Michigan. Arthur put in 35 years in manufacturing management while Diane worked as a healthcare administrator. They did everything right. They lived within their means, funded their retirement accounts, and today they're sitting on a nest egg of about $600,000 in combined IRAs. Their home is worth $450,000. But here's the catch. They still owe $150,000 on their mortgage, carrying a monthly payment of roughly $1,400 when you factor in principal and interest. Arthur wants to take a lump sum from their IRA, pay the tax hit, and wipe out the mortgage forever. He wants to own the dirt under his feet. Diane, however, just got off the phone with their financial advisor. The advisor strongly cautioned against it. He warned them about the massive tax liability of pulling that much money out at once and showed them a beautiful full-color chart illustrating how that $150,000 could grow to over $300,000 over the next 15 years if left in their balanced portfolio. So, who was right? The advisor's math is technically correct in a vacuum, but that vacuum ignores the brutal realities of the 2026 economic landscape. We are no longer living in the 1990s. Back then, you retired with a defined benefit pension. The Social Security covered a much larger percentage of your living costs, and you could walk into a local bank and get a 6 or 7% guaranteed return on a certificate of deposit. Risk was a choice. Today, risk is mandatory. The traditional Wall Street system relies on one fundamental metric, which is assets under management. Your advisor gets paid a percentage of the money they manage for you. If Arthur and Diane pull $150,000 out of their accounts to pay off the bank, the advisor takes a permanent pay cut. It's an inherent conflict of interest that nobody wants to talk about. The financial industry has spent billions of dollars marketing the idea that debt is simply a tool, a form of leverage to be optimized. If Arthur withdraws $150,000 on top of their Social Security and standard distributions, he's going to spike their adjusted gross income. Suddenly, they're pushed into a brutally high tax bracket. Not only does the IRS take a massive bite out of that withdrawal, but the spike in income triggers the income-related monthly adjustment amount. This means their Medicare Part B and Part D premiums could double or triple for the year. The financial advisor points to this tax nightmare as the ultimate reason to keep the mortgage. He says they'll lose 30 or 40 cents on every dollar they withdraw just to pay off a cheap bank loan. He calls it financial suicide. But the advisor is only telling half the story. He's using a short-term tax penalty to justify a long-term systemic drain on their wealth. Let us talk about the psychological erosion of carrying debt into your final chapters. Every single month, that $1,400 mortgage payment acts as a hard floor on Arthur and Diane's cash flow requirements. To generate that $1,400 from their portfolio, they have to withdraw at an annualized rate that might exceed the safe withdrawal limit, especially in years when the market takes a dive. This is where sequence of returns risk comes in, and it's the silent killer of the American retirement dream. If Arthur and Diane keep the mortgage and the market experiences a severe 20% correction in the first 2 years of their retirement, they're forced to sell off shares of their investments at rock-bottom prices just to make the mortgage payment. They're cannibalizing their own wealth. The spreadsheet math assumes a smooth, consistent 8% return every single year, but the market is violent. It's unpredictable. And when you're 68 years old, you don't have the luxury of waiting 10 years for your portfolio to recover. You might be thinking, but what if inflation stays high? Doesn't inflation make my fixed-rate mortgage debt cheaper over time? That's the classic argument. The idea is that you're paying the bank back with depreciated dollars. And yes, strictly speaking, a fixed debt loses its real-world bite during inflationary periods. But what good is a depreciated mortgage payment if your grocery bills, your property taxes, and your Medicare premiums are skyrocketing at the exact same time? The middle-class squeeze in 2026 is unprecedented. We're seeing seniors who thought they were perfectly secure suddenly realizing their fixed income is barely covering the necessities. In that environment, eliminating your largest fixed monthly expense is not a mathematical error, it's a defensive fortress. We've been conditioned to worship the rate of return, ignoring the catastrophic impact of risk. We forget that the ultimate goal of retirement is not to die with the highest possible number in a brokerage account. The goal is independence. The goal is waking up on a Tuesday morning, pouring a cup of coffee, and knowing that no bank, no market fluctuation, and no economic downturn can take your home away from you. As a straight shooter, I respect the decades of sweat equity you've poured into your life. You've earned the right to unfiltered truth, not slick sales pitches designed to keep your money in the casino. In the next phase of this breakdown, we're going to tear apart the exact numbers. We'll put the advisor's spreadsheet under a microscope and reveal the hidden tax traps and cash flow drains they deliberately omit when they tell you to keep your mortgage.
Let us put the financial advisor's favorite word under the microscope. That word is spread. They love to talk about the spread. The pitch is always the same. If your mortgage is locked in at 3.5% and your balanced mutual fund portfolio averages a 7.5% return, you are capturing a 4% spread. They make it sound like gravity, as if that 4% is just floating in the air waiting for you to collect it. But that spread is an illusion, constructed entirely on gross numbers, while you, as a retiree, are forced to live on net numbers. Let us break down the brutal math of keeping that $150,000 mortgage for Arthur and Diane. First, we have to look at the invisible leeches attached to that money if it stays in the market. Arthur's advisor is charging a standard 1.25% assets under management fee. On top of that, the money is not sitting in individual stocks. It is bundled into target date funds and mutual funds with their own internal expense ratios, averaging around 0.6%. Right out of the gate, before the market even opens, Arthur and Diane are paying 1.85% every single year just for the privilege of keeping their money on Wall Street. So that theoretical 7.5% return is instantly knocked down to 5.65%. Now factor in the IRS. Any growth or dividend yield generated by those funds inside a standard brokerage account is subject to taxation, or if it is inside a traditional IRA, every dollar pulled out is taxed as ordinary income. Now let us flip the ledger and look at the actual cost of feeding that mortgage. Arthur and Diane have a monthly payment of $1,400. That's $16,800 a year. But here's the critical data point that the financial media never explains. You do not pay your mortgage with pre-tax dollars. You pay it with after-tax dollars. To get $16,800 of clean, spendable cash to hand over to the bank, Arthur has to withdraw significantly more from his IRA to cover the federal and state tax liabilities. Assuming a conservative 20% effective tax rate on those distributions, Arthur actually has to liquidate $21,000 a year just to keep the bank satisfied. Over the next 10 years, if they follow the advisor's plan to hold the debt, they will be forced to drain $210,000 from their retirement accounts simply to service a $150,000 loan. But it gets much worse when we introduce the reality of the 2026 economic environment. We're not in the completely artificial zero interest rate bubble of the 2010s anymore. The Federal Reserve has fundamentally altered the cost of capital. We're seeing sustained market volatility. The spreadsheet the advisor showed Diane assumes a perfectly smooth upward line, compounding efficiently year after year. What happens if we hit a flat market, or worse, a routine market correction where the portfolio drops by 12%? Let's walk through that scenario. The $150,000 Arthur left in the market drops to $132,000. But the bank doesn't care what the S&P 500 did this month. The bank still demands its $1,400. So Arthur has to sell off assets at depressed prices to generate that $21,000 gross withdrawal. His balance collapses from $132,000 down to $111,000 in a single year. He's experienced systemic erosion. He's lost nearly 30% of that specific capital block. And because he sold those shares at a loss, they can never participate in the market recovery. The mathematical spread just blew up in his face. The counter-argument is always the tax bomb. The advisor warns that pulling $150,000 out in a single year would trigger massive tax penalties and spike their Medicare premiums through the IRMA surcharge. And the advisor is right about the short-term hit. It will hurt. But we have to look at the long-term cash flow defense. By ripping the Band-Aid off and paying the taxes now, or strategically spreading the payoff over 2 tax years, Arthur and Diane achieve something infinitely more valuable than a hypothetical market return. They permanently reduce their baseline income requirements. Without that mortgage, they no longer need to generate that extra $21,000 of gross income every single year. Their adjusted gross income permanently drops. Because their AGI is lower, less of their Social Security benefits are subject to federal taxation. Because their AGI is lower, they are permanently shielded from future Medicare premium spikes. They are insulating their wealth from the very system designed to bleed it dry. Wall Street wants you to stay leveraged because your leverage is their liquidity. They want you carrying debt into your 70s because it forces you to keep your capital trapped in their casino, generating fees for them regardless of whether the market is up or down. But true wealth preservation is not about optimizing a theoretical rate of return. It's about eliminating fixed liabilities so that your money actually belongs to you.
If the math is so clearly stacked against keeping a mortgage in retirement, why is it so agonizing to actually write that check to the bank? We need to have a very honest conversation about the psychology of wealth, because the barriers keeping you in debt are not just mathematical, they're deeply emotional, and they have been deliberately installed in your mind by a financial industry that profits from your hesitation. Think about the physical act of logging into your Fidelity or Vanguard account.
As you can see,
There is an undeniable, visceral comfort in seeing a large number on that screen. For Arthur and Diane, seeing $600,000 represents a lifetime of sacrifice. It represents early mornings, missed family dinners, and decades of discipline. It is their armor against the unknown. If Arthur takes $150,000 out of that account to pay off the mortgage, the balance immediately drops to $450,000. Human beings are hardwired for loss aversion. The psychological pain of seeing your life savings drop by 25% in a single day feels like a catastrophic failure, even when that money is simply being transferred from a liquid asset into a hard asset. Your brain registers the lower account balance as a loss of security.
The financial industry understands this cognitive bias perfectly. They exploit your natural fear of a shrinking account balance to convince you that keeping a massive liability hanging over your head is somehow the safer option. They call it maintaining liquidity. But true liquidity is cash flow, and a $1,400 monthly mortgage payment is the exact opposite of cash flow. It is a relentless drain. We also have to confront the systemic conditioning you have been subjected to for the last 40 years. If you grew up in the middle of the 20th century, debt was generally viewed as a burden. It was something you worked fiercely to eliminate. But starting in the 1980s and accelerating through the 1990s, the narrative completely shifted. The financial media and the banking sector successfully rebranded debt. They split it into categories. They told you credit card debt was bad, but a mortgage was good debt. They normalized the idea that you should carry a 30-year note for the entirety of your adult life. You were sold the idea of leverage. The media taught the American middle class to treat their primary residences like corporate balance sheets. You hear analysts on financial entertainment networks talking about putting your lazy equity to work. They make you feel unsophisticated, almost foolish, if you have a paid-off house. There is a bizarre form of keeping up with the Joneses in retirement. It is no longer about having the shiniest car in the driveway. It is about signaling financial sophistication. Keeping a mortgage to arbitrage the stock market makes people feel like Wall Street insiders. But you are not a hedge fund. You are a human being trying to preserve your dignity and your independence in the final third of your life. This brings us to the most dangerous cognitive bias of all, the fear of missing out. In the 2026 economic environment, we are constantly bombarded with headlines about tech stocks surging, artificial intelligence creating billionaires overnight, and index funds hitting new highs. Diane looks at that $150,000 in her portfolio and thinks about what it could become. She is terrified that the moment they pay off the house, the market will go on a historic run and they will miss out on the gains. This is where the reality check is required. When you are 68 years old, you have already won the game. You survived the wealth accumulation phase. You do not need to chase outsized returns to secure your future. The objective is no longer growth at all costs. The objective is defense. The fear of missing out on a 20% market rally is completely irrational when compared to the very real danger of a 20% market correction, forcing you to liquidate assets to pay your mortgage. There is also a profound misunderstanding of the billionaire comparison trap. Financial advisors love to point out that ultra-wealthy individuals use debt all the time. They will say, look at wealthy executives. They never pay cash for their mansions. They leverage. That is a statistically true statement, but a dangerously out of context. The ultra-wealthy use debt because they have infinite, highly diversified cash flow streams that completely insulate them from systemic risk. If the stock market drops by half, their lifestyle doesn't change. If Arthur and Diane's portfolio drops by half and they still have that $1,400 monthly mortgage payment, their entire standard of living is completely shattered. Applying the debt strategies of the top 0.1% to a middle-class retiree is like driving a family sedan onto a Formula One racetrack. It's going to end in disaster. I know how difficult it is to break free from this conditioning. You have been told by the smartest people in the room that holding debt is the intelligent move. I am validating your anxiety. It is completely normal to feel paralyzed when making a decision that contradicts 40 years of financial advice. But you have to recognize that the advice you received was designed to optimize the wealth of the institutions managing your money, not to optimize your peace of mind. The moment you sign that final document and the bank releases the lien on your property, a profound psychological shift occurs. You stop checking the Dow Jones Industrial Average every morning with a knot in your stomach. You stop worrying about Federal Reserve interest rate hikes. You reclaim your cognitive bandwidth. You are no longer a tenant to the banking system. You become the absolute owner of your sanctuary. In the next section, we are going to pivot from the mindset to the exact tactical execution of this strategy. I will lay out the precise steps you need to take on Monday morning to safely extract that capital, navigate the tax implications, and permanently eliminate the bank from your life. We have dismantled the Wall Street math and we have broken through the psychological conditioning. Now we execute. It is Monday morning. You have made the decision to reclaim your independence and eliminate your mortgage. You do not just call your broker and tell them to wire $150,000 to your checking account. That is how you trigger a massive, unnecessary tax bomb. You need a surgical approach. Here is your highly granular, step-by-step masterclass on how to deleverage your life in the most tax-efficient way possible. Step 1 is the asset inventory. Most Americans make the fatal mistake of treating their retirement savings as one giant bucket of money. It is not. You have to look at the tax status of every single dollar to your name. You likely have money in 3 different tax environments: taxable brokerage accounts, tax-deferred accounts like a traditional IRA or 401k, and tax-free accounts like a Roth IRA or HSA. If Arthur and Diane want to generate $150,000, they should not automatically liquidate their traditional IRA. First, they need to look at their taxable brokerage accounts. When you sell assets in a taxable account that you have held for more than a year, you pay long-term capital gains rates, which are significantly lower than ordinary income tax rates. In fact, depending on your total income, your long-term capital gains rate could be 0% or 15%. Contrast that with pulling money from a traditional IRA, where every single dollar is taxed at your highest marginal income tax bracket. You cannot do this math on a napkin. You need to see exactly how withdrawals impact your specific tax brackets. I use the tax modeling software linked in the description below. It is a mandatory tool for this strategy. Run your numbers there before you move a single dollar. Step 2 is the multi-year payoff strategy. If you must use funds from your traditional tax-deferred accounts, you absolutely must avoid jumping multiple tax brackets in a single year. Let us say Arthur and Diane realize they need to pull $100,000 from their traditional IRA to finish off the mortgage. If they do it all in July, they will spike their adjusted gross income and trigger the Medicare IRMA surcharge, penalizing them heavily on their healthcare premiums for the upcoming year. Instead, they use the calendar to their advantage. They withdraw $50,000 in late November. 6 weeks later, in early January of the following tax year, they withdraw the remaining $50,000. They have successfully split the tax liability across 2 separate years, keeping their adjusted gross income below the critical thresholds and avoiding the Medicare premium spikes altogether. The bank still gets paid in a span of 45 days, but the IRS gets a significantly smaller piece of your wealth. Now we must address an important edge case. What if you owe $300,000 on your mortgage, and even splitting it across 2 years would completely decimate your portfolio and trigger catastrophic taxes? Are you just trapped? No, you execute step 3, mortgage recasting. Very few financial advisors talk about recasting because it doesn't make them any money. A recast is not a refinance. You keep your exact same low interest rate and you do not reset the clock to 30 years. Instead, you drop a strategic lump sum onto the principal. Let's say you drop $100,000 onto that balance. You then pay your mortgage servicer a small administrative fee, usually a few $100s, and they recalculate your amortization schedule based on the new, lower principal balance. Your 3% interest rate stays the exact same, but your required monthly payment plummets. This is an incredibly powerful defensive maneuver. You drastically lower your fixed monthly overhead, significantly reducing the amount of cash you need to pull from your portfolio every month, without having to completely drain your reserves to pay off the entire house at once. Step 4 is the post-mortgage cash flow restructure. The day the bank sends you the deed, you suddenly have a massive surplus of cash flow. For Arthur and Diane, that is $1,400 a month that is no longer going to the lender. This is where most retirees fail. They let lifestyle creep consume that new cash flow. They lease a new car or start taking luxury vacations. You must treat that $1,400 with absolute discipline. Your immediate action is to permanently lower your portfolio withdrawal rate. If you were withdrawing 5% of your nest egg every year to survive, and eliminating the mortgage allows you to drop that withdrawal rate to 3.5%, you have just mathematically bulletproofed your retirement. A 3.5% withdrawal rate can weather almost any severe market correction in history. Alternatively, if your cash reserves were depleted by paying off the house, you redirect that monthly surplus straight into a high-yield cash equivalent until your emergency fund is fully restored to a 2-year buffer. You are taking the cash flow that used to build the bank's balance sheet and using it to build your own financial fortress. This is not about giving up market returns. It's about restructuring your balance sheet so that you dictate the terms of your retirement, not the Federal Reserve and not Wall Street.
Let us fast forward the clock. It is no longer 2026, it is 2041. Arthur and Diane are now 83 years old. I want you to truly visualize this stage of life, because this is where the spreadsheet math completely falls apart and the reality of your decisions comes home to roost. At 83, your priorities have drastically shifted. You are no longer thinking about optimizing a 4% spread on a mutual fund. You are thinking about your physical mobility, your out-of-pocket healthcare costs, and whether one of you will require in-home nursing care, which could easily cost $6,000 to $8,000 a month by that time. You are deeply focused on the legacy you are leaving behind and the absolute security of your spouse. Let us look at the timeline where Arthur and Diane listened to their financial advisor. They kept the $150,000 mortgage to stay liquid in the market. Over the last 15 years, they navigated 3 different market corrections. Every single month, regardless of whether the S&P 500 was up or down, the bank automatically drafted $1,400 from their checking account. To feed that draft, they had to constantly sell off shares, cannibalizing their principal during down years. Now, at 83, their portfolio is severely depleted. It was not destroyed by a single crash, but by the relentless compounding drain of servicing debt while simultaneously trying to survive inflation. Then, the unthinkable happens, the event nobody wants to plan for. Arthur passes away. This is the brutal, unspoken reality of American retirement. When a spouse dies, the household income immediately drops because the surviving spouse loses the smaller of the 2 Social Security checks. Diane is now alone. Her fixed income has been slashed by perhaps a third, and yet the bank does not care. The bank still demands $1,400 on the first of every month. Diane is now facing the terrifying prospect of losing her home or being forced to sell it under duress and move into an assisted living facility simply because she can no longer service the debt on a reduced income. The smart Wall Street leverage strategy has left a widow financially vulnerable in the most fragile decade of her life. Now, let us look at the alternate reality, the reality where Arthur and Diane ignored the advisor, took the short-term tax hit, and paid off the house in 2026. For 15 years, they lived with fundamentally lower overhead. Because their required monthly withdrawals were drastically reduced, their portfolio was able to weather the market corrections without being drained. When Arthur passes away in this timeline, Diane is grieving, but she is not facing a financial catastrophe. She owns the dirt under her feet. Her sanctuary is completely secured. Even with the loss of Arthur's Social Security check, her remaining income is more than enough to cover property taxes, insurance, and utilities. She maintains her dignity. She maintains her independence. That is what wealth preservation actually looks like. Now, I have to be completely transparent with you. I am just a guy on the internet sharing my research and the brutal mathematical truths of the system. I do not know your specific tax brackets, your family dynamics, or your medical history. Always consult a fiduciary, a fee-only advisor who is legally bound to act in your best interest before you make sweeping changes to your portfolio. But you must also arm yourself with this data so that you can challenge them when they try to sell you a strategy that keeps you in debt. Do not let a commissioned salesman dictate the security of your final years. Wall Street has convinced an entire generation that taking risk in your 70s and 80s is somehow a badge of honor. They have normalized financial anxiety. They want you checking your portfolio balance on your screen every morning because as long as you are worried about the market, you are keeping your capital trapped in their system. But I have the utmost respect for the decades of sweat equity you have poured into this country. You spent 40 years clocking in, dealing with commutes, paying taxes, and sacrificing your time for your family. You did not do all of that just to spend your golden years acting as a yield-generating asset for a global banking conglomerate. True wealth is not defined by the absolute highest number on a brokerage statement on the day you die. True wealth is the ability to dictate the terms of your own life. It is waking up with the absolute certainty that your foundational needs are met, immune to the panic of Wall Street, immune to the shifting policies of the Federal Reserve, and immune to the endless greed of the banking sector. Your home is not a corporate balance sheet. It is not a tool for leverage to appease a wealth manager. It is your fortress. In an economic landscape defined by unpredictability, systemic erosion, and middle-class extraction, holding the deed to your own property is the ultimate act of rebellion. It is the final declaration of financial independence. Pay off the mortgage, reclaim your peace of mind, and build a fortress that no market correction can ever tear down.